Hi, my name is Shane Rushton, and this is like take 75 of this tutorial, because I keep forgetting little parts. The name of this tutorial is radio button style checkboxes without form or active control elements, or that's probably not what I ended up naming it, but that's kind of what it really is about. And I just wanted to give a background on it because I hate form and ActiveX controls. At work, I use a laptop, and I design a lot of tools in Excel for various teams in my groups and outside of my groups. And recently I had the pleasure of dealing with ActiveX and Form Controls by a sheet that was given to me, a tool that was given to me, with those elements in it, including checkboxes and radio buttons and drop downs and things like that. So, excuse me. So one of the things that I noticed is that whenever I would undock, if I'd been working on that tool for a while, and then maybe came home to work on it for a bit, as I clicked in one of those form controls or ActiveX controls, it started to grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I did what I always do. I looked at Google to find an answer. Couldn't find an answer everywhere. I found a lot of people complaining about it, but nobody had any solutions. The other thing that I was noticing is that you would click into a cell, one of those fields, and then maybe a text box. And if there was text in it, the text would start shrinking to the point where it was so small it was unreadable and looked more like a speck on your screen, like your screen was dirty. And then I would go into the properties to think, well, maybe I'll just change the size of it, and the size hadn't changed. It just for some reason it shrunk to nothing. There was no explanation for it, and it got really frustrating to work on these things and then have it come home and work on it a bit and save it and realize that all of those elements across like 20 sheets had changed. So I decided that I didn't want any more of that. The cells themselves were easy to format, and I could make a lot of code run by various actions by just using cells. So I set out to learn how to make things happen without those checkboxes. My first iterations of that were very successful. I was able to create checkboxes that acted like this, where you could click on one, click right back in it and uncheck it. You wouldn't have to click out of the cell and back in. And then they'd be mutually exclusive. And you can accomplish mutual exclusivity by using some of these radio button features that they offer. You throw two radio buttons on your sheet, and you'll only be able to keep one in an active state. Both of them won't be active, so you click on one. But what I don't like about this is that you can't click back in it immediately and make that disappear. So if you don't want that option checked, you have to check this option. And there's no other way to really to go around that. So that doesn't really work for me. I'm not into that. The other way to handle some of that would be checkboxes. And of course, with checkboxes, you get that nice functionality where you can uncheck the box when you need to. But the problem with checkboxes is, if this is a mutually exclusive situation, and you're working with people who maybe don't pay attention as much, and they're sending this along to somebody, then both of these boxes are checked, and it can create confusion. So you can either use some VBA code to make these boxes work mutually exclusively. I've done that before. It works. But for every group, you have to name them specifically, and you can't name them the same. You can't give them the same name. They have to be unique. So there's a lot of coding involved, and there's a lot of extra lines. And indeed, if you have a lot of these checkboxes, like I have, you can run into lots of lines of code. And recently I've done that, and then I had an epiphany that I don't have to do that. I've been doing it wrong this whole time. So I thought I would do a tutorial on how to make mutually exclusive checkboxes and make it so you could scale it. So in case you were building a tool and you thought there might be a need to add things later, and some of these checkboxes would be some of those things that you would add, you couldn't really do that if you have to add more code. You can, it's just a pain. So I found a way to create the code that would make this thing happen like I want it to. Mutually exclusive checkboxes. And anytime I ever add any of the code, or if I ever add another checkbox in here, like say this cell right here, let's just call that, it doesn't matter what you call it as long as it fits my naming convention, then it will work. So let's do that. Here's the deal behind it. First things first, formatting. That's the most important part of this code. Formatting is important. Whenever I open up an Excel sheet to create a tool, my very first move that I always do is I highlight all the rows that I'm going to be using. I right click on it, I go to column width, I choose the 2.25 width to get this graph paper look. The reason for that is names are longer than phone numbers. And in an event where I don't like having extra space and I have to stack all of my inputs on top of one another, it just, I don't know, it seems to get to me to have that. So since names and phone numbers can be different lengths, you're kind of set to whatever this column length is set to for this particular field. While this guy's name could be really, really long, and you have lots of room for that, you've got more space here than you need. And it's not really an issue. It's maybe an obsessive compulsive thing. No offense to you people, but it's just, for me, it's not good. Here's what it looks like if I go ahead and format these with the same widths. But I don't have to if I've done the width thing that I just told you about by breaking those down to 2.25. I can then set my widths differently in here. And the reason behind that is it's pretty simple. It's just a matter of geography. I want to have checkboxes at some point that are either just yes checkboxes or even yes or no checkboxes, and you can't do that with a rectangle. I cannot take a rectangle and turn that into a square. I can't do it. But I can turn squares into a rectangle. So it makes sense to just go one and done, highlight, column width, 2.25. If I don't need these cells over here to be merged, fine. But if I need them, I have it. And it's just that simple. So that way you can create these checkboxes the way that you do. There's another thing to consider. It's the font. That checkbox is created using a capital P, as you can see here in this section. And that capital P with wingdings to font, as you'll see up here in the font section, capital P will make that checkbox. You can use a capital X, you can use a regular X if you want to, but no other letter will make a checkbox except for capital P with wingdings too. So with those formatting constraints in place, you'll be able to create a checkbox that looks like a checkbox and it has a check in it like a checkbox might. So finally, the last part of this before you get to the code is naming conventions. So what I wanted to do was create a name that looked good so that I could differentiate what my cell was and what it was applying to. And I also wanted to create a very sensible naming convention. So for my yes cells, I chose Y underscore for each and every single one of them. And for my no, it was N underscore. The reason is twofold. Yes and no are different character lengths in their words. You know, obviously no is 2 characters and yes is 3. And you understand, and so do I, what the difference between Y and N is in terms of Boolean values being yes and no. The other one was to create the same amount of characters prior to the name Apples. And I used the name Apples for both of these so that it would appear to be like a married couple back in 1950 when their first names could be different, but the last name wasn't. It was the same. So essentially it turned this into Y underscore Apples, N underscore Apples, to indicate to me that I have a yes that I like apples and a no that I like apples. And it was clear that it was about apples and not about napples or yapples, so that's what the underscore was about. Plus, having the underscore in there guaranteed that I would always have 2 characters to look at from the first 2 characters to the left, and then I could differentiate whether or not they were yes or no. And that becomes important here in a minute, and I'll show you why. It doesn't matter how you name them. The point is you want to make sure that the first 2 characters, or the first characters, or whatever you're putting here is the same character length, whether it be 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever, or 20, I don't care. But they got to be the same length. That's important because of math. And then they have to be grouped by last name essentially. So this group is blueberries, this group is peaches. So once you've considered all of those things, we'll move to the code. Now, in the code for this one, I didn't want to have this code available to all the sheets. I didn't need that. If you do, then you can go over here and you can insert a VBA module, and then you can set the code in there, and then you can make this trigger to point to that code from the worksheet. I don't need to do that. This is only going to be available for this sheet and for this tutorial. So in the sheet module, double click here and choose worksheet in this section and selection change. That's important. This will trigger any code inside here whenever you change from one cell to another. That's what that means. So there's 2 things you have to do to make these checkboxes mutually exclusive. And to make them act like checkboxes. So how I do it is I apply a creative variable and I make it a string variable. In this case, it's my cell. This line of code, on error resume next, will ensure that if this variable is null, that this code will not run. Because if it is null, then it will error out on you. So this will keep it from erroring. Just remember that. Absolutely crucial. Without this, it will not run without bugging out. So then I apply the name, or the value of my cell variable is going to be applied using the active cell variable. This is a built-in variable in Excel. If you know VBA, you know that. Active cell is referring to whatever cell you've just clicked on or that's currently active. It triggers the moment that the cell is activated. It's got .name twice. If it only has the one .name, it will grab the absolute value of like $A, $15. The second .name will apply whatever name range you've given it, so that y_apples is now applied to my cell. So if you, no matter which one you click on, it'll be y_ and then whatever the last name is. For blueberries, it's blueberries, etc. So once you click on a cell, it immediately applies that value. And then what we're going to want to do is look at the left two characters of my variable, and if they equal y_, then what we're going to do is run some code. And how I do that is I look at the active cell, which is the one we just clicked on. If that cell is blank, throw a capital P in it. Likewise, if that cell has a capital P in it already, go ahead and remove that P and just put nothing in there. And then here's the piece of code that will make it mutually exclusive. So in here, we're going to assign the range, the value of the range n_, and whatever the other opposite cell that you clicked on originally, whatever that is, we're going to assign that to the value of 0. We do that by setting up our range, and in our quotes we're going to throw the n_, because that's the opposite of the y_ that we found up here. We're going to use a concatenator to then take from the right of the whole word in my cell, we're going to find the entire length of it. So if it were 8 characters here, then we would subtract 2 from it. And essentially we're going to take the 8 minus 2 characters from the right and go backward and pick the last 6 characters of that entire word. So if the name happened to be y_apples, this piece of code is going to tell it to find the cell that's named _apples, or whatever the word of whatever that cell name is minus those first 2 characters. And that's why it's crucial to keep the number of characters at the beginning the same. And then once you've determined that, we want you to move your cursor. You're going to put that box, we're going to check the box, we're going to make the other box appear to have nothing in it. And then I want you to move the cursor 1 cell to the right. If you don't know active cell offset, that active cell offset will move your cursor the amount of cells that you list in here. It's vertical followed by horizontal. Positive numbers will move down and to the right. Negative numbers will move up and to the left. So in this column, if you have a 1 or higher, it will move down. If it's a -1, it will go up. Same way here. If it's right, it'll be negative. If it's -1, it'll be left. If it's +1, it'll go right. So that piece of code literally tells the cursor to go 1 cell to the right from where you're currently at. The second part of this code in this else if statement is exactly what we just did, except in reverse. It will look for if the current value is the n_, then apply that same check formality or functionality to it, and then go look for the other cell that starts with the y_ that has the same last name as this first one, and then uncheck it, and then move your cell to the right. So to see all that in action, if you click on the oranges, then it's going to look at y_oranges is the first one you click. So then it's going to look for n_oranges over here and uncheck it. And that's why it works. And it works anytime from here on out. No matter how you name that cell, if you always name it either starting with an _n or yn_ or y_, it will always from that point forward act like a checkbox. So that's how you make mutually exclusive checkboxes without using ActiveX and Form Controls. It's very nice. It works every time, and it's nice and scalable. And I encourage you to do that better because the functionality over time is way better. And thank you for listening.